Welcome back. This is the second part of an Airtable mini-series. In this session, we'll be looking at Airtable interfaces, including implementation of forms for data entry. If you haven't already checked out the introduction session, I have linked this above and also in the description. Today, we'll be building on the solution we put together in that session, adding clear and easy to use interfaces for better usability. So let's jump straight in and start building. Now we are logged back into Airtable, we can have a look at what we built in the previous session. So we're in our integration project management solution. We can jump into our basis, and here we can see the various tables that we generated in the previous session. Now what we're going to do is we're going to jump across into the forms element here, where we can then develop and build forms for each of our individual tables. So let's do this now. So we can click here, we can add a new form. We can select the table that we want to build that form based on. Let's start with person. We can then give it a name, new person, that's fine. And then we can hit create form. This will instantly create a new form with the various fields that you're expecting to enter. From here, we can then set up what we want to enter and the order. So here we've got a name field. We can look at this, we can change the title, and we can also indicate whether it's a required field. So we can go, yep, name's required. We can go, well, email address is required. The type, and this is obviously whether it's staff or contractor as we did before. We can say that's required, as well as the role. So we've got that set up there. Everything else on the right hand side with regards to the form, I think will probably stay as default. So we've got 4 fields visible, various settings on here around submissions. We've got a message, so when we finish entering, thank you for submitting the form, we can make this more personalized by saying record created maybe. So we want to show on here, submit another response. So if we were submitting multiple, then that will enable that. We're not worried about email responses. And yeah, that looks fairly straightforward. So now we're happy with this. We can obviously go in and we can add things like cover images and logos, etc. But we're just looking at getting something functional at the moment. We can then hit publish form. The moment we hit publish form, we then get an option here around access. So by default, you've got only users with base access. Otherwise, you can allow anyone on the web and you can share then the link for this. In this case, we're just using the sort of free version, but you could then allow anyone on a particular domain, so your team, for instance, full access to this particular form. So that will enable them to use it in order to do data entry. So we're just going to close that out at the moment, and we've got a form here now. So we can put, let's say, Bob Builder, for instance. We can then put whatever the email address is on here. Just make something up for the moment. And then we can choose the type. So we're going to go, this is staff member, the role. We can go, this is a new developer. And then we can hit submit. And there we go. So it's saying it's created a new record. And if we want to submit another response, we could hit submit another response, and that would open up a new form. Or we can just go back to home, and that will take us back. So we're back on home now. So let's go back into our basis, back into the forms. And here we can then see we've got this new form. And we can unpublish it if we want. We can duplicate it, rename it. We've got full control of that form now. And we can also from here do a preview, so we can see what it will look like between the designer and, so this is being the design side, and the actual physical form itself. And from in here, we can actually share the form and choose to share it between anyone else. So we can change those sort of permissions. Okay, so from there then, we've now created the person form. Let's create a, we could do one for projects. So we're going to then select project, new project, and then hit create form. And again, this is going to create us a form with some of the elements on it, and then by default, and then we can go in now and start adding, editing those details. So what we're going to do here, we've got our name, we've got our notes. So on here, we want that required. Notes, let's say that's required as well. And we may say that the document's optional based on various things there. We can go in here as well, and we can look at restricting types if we've got a plan that allows that. And the same for the number of file uploads as well. So we can actually change those if we've got a different plan. Again, we're just using the free plan on here just to demonstrate this. So we've got the document that we might want to upload, but also something we really want to include on here is we want the owner. We want to be able to, when we create a task, set the owner for that particular project. Because if we don't give an owner to it, then no one's going to own ownership of the completion and deliverable of that project itself. So we want to make this in itself also mandatory or required field. So we're going to do that now. So we've got selection here. We've got all people. We've got specific people. So we can allow specific users. So allows users to select from 4 people, allow custom amount, etc. This is just by default. It will just allow us to add the particular person on there. And it's just the one person because that's what we set up in the base table. So again, all of these forms are going to adhere to the rules that we've put in place on the actual table itself with regards to the drop downs, with regards to formats and data entry, etc. So now we've got this project bit set up. We can then go preview and we can see, okay, we're going to do a test project. We can put notes in here, project description, whatever that's going to be. We could then upload a document if we wanted to, and then we can select a person that's going to manage that. And then we can hit submit, and that's going to create that. Now we can have a look at this to see whether we want to allow multiple submissions. So this has got submit another response on there. That's absolutely fine. So yeah, everything there, again, is fairly straightforward. Now, if I hit forms on the left-hand side here, we can see that we've got our new person and our new project is currently unpublished. So we won't be able to use this outside of sort of the developer mode that we're in now. What we need to do is publish the form. So let's publish that. Okay, that's now been published, so that's great. We can then go back. And I keep jumping back out of this. I need to go back. Lots of forms. So on here now we've got new person and our new project form. We can then look at creating our new task form. So let's hit add. We can then go task. We want to call it new task. Hit create form. And there we go. We've got a whole load of details here already. So we want to have the name of the task required. We want to have the notes, the role. We might want to require that. The status, again, that's important. We want to force a status for this. Start date and end date. Now, we may not actually know those, so we might be happy to leave those as not being required. We can then look, so we've got assigned resource. We're going to want to allow on there. So we want the task to be allocated a resource. Now, again, as a project manager, you might go in and go, well, it needs X, it needs Y, we need this planning. You won't necessarily know who those resources are. So it might make sense not to force the required field for certain fields like maybe the start date, end date, and the assigned resource. But we may want to do that for some of the other fields on there as well. So let's look at start date and end date. We might think, well, from a planning perspective, if you're adding a task on there, you might want to force those, or you may not. It just completely depends on what you want to do on there. But I think for that, we're probably okay. So we've got the project. I know we need to add the project in. There we go, project. Perfect. So we've got a task. We're going to say this, who the assigned resource is, who the project is for that. And again, you can drag and move things around to decide where they sit. So we've got these sitting singly like that. We might want to bunch them in together potentially, depending on how we want this to look. But I think, yeah, we're going to have the task there. I would say for a new task, we're going to force the requirement of what project it's being assigned to. Otherwise, we've basically got a sort of dead task. So we don't really want that. So we will force the selection of a project, but we won't force the assigned resource to be selected. Okay, so we do a preview of that. Yep, that kind of looks okay. And actually from here we can even publish the form. So let's do that. Okay, we've got that. And then we can go back to the edit side. And that'll save us jumping back. Okay, so if we hit forms now, we've got our 3 forms set up. What we can then do is give access to these. We can also then start looking at our interfaces. So we can start building reports and some really nice dashboard interfaces. And within those interfaces, we can expose these forms. So we can have what tasks are outstanding against what project, and directly from that interface, we can expose these forms for data entry, which is really, really useful. So let's start looking at our interfaces now. So from here, we can now start building. We're now looking to build an interface, not a form, because we've done the forms already. On the interface, we can call this projects, hit next, and then we've got the different layouts that we can choose. So we've got a list, we've got gallery, Kanban, calendar, forms if we want to, and dashboards and so forth. What we're going to start doing is we're going to firstly look at list and how we can make this list more interesting and more user-friendly, more useful. We're then going to build on this and we're going to look at what we can do with dashboards. And then lastly, we're going to look at team-related interfaces like Kanban and how they can be used in order to aid your team in managing those tasks. So firstly, let's look at creating a list. So we can select list and hit next. Here we're then going to be asked to connect to a particular table to base that list on. Now this is going to be projects kind of related, projects and potentially tasks, etc. as well, but it's really going to be around our projects. So we can select that and then hit finish. This will then create our projects interface. We can then give this a bit of a rename. We can call this projects and tasks, because what we're going to look to do here is we're going to revamp this in order to give a good view of projects, but also a view of the underlying tasks for those as well. So what we'd want to do here is we want to keep our headline project name and maybe the owner, and then potentially the tasks that we want below that. So if we look at what we've got at the moment, we've got our title, we've got our source. We haven't got any filters or anything like that set up. The visualization is a list, that's fine. And then we've got various elements here. So what is really useful when we look at lists are tabs, because what we can do using this is we can actually add additional tabs in and use those to portray almost like filters or different sort of views of that data. So we're going to have our all projects, which will be everything. I think it would be good to then have a tab for projects with unallocated tasks. Again, if we're thinking of managing this like a business, we would want to ensure that all of our tasks are allocated. We would then potentially also want to have a look or be monitoring any projects with late tasks. So we've created multiple tabs here. We can then go down and we can have a look. If we click on the main screen here, we can go on here on tabs and we look at ordering those. So top level or further on the left, we want all projects. We can then look at unallocated tasks, and then we can look at projects with late tasks. So there we go. So we're starting to now build this list up to give us what we want. From here, we can look at then adding filters that will allow us to be able to get this to display the results that we actually want. For now, this will be all right, and we can start having a look at the design aspects. So if we select our all projects, let's make that capital just so it's a bit clearer than everything else. We can then select the main pane here, and we can look, we've got levels here. If we hit the little cog here, we then have the possibility to enter or add a level above or a level below. Now we already know, because we know our data structure, we've got projects and projects can have tasks, that we need to add a below level. So if we now do that, adding tasks as our level below. And now on the left hand side, we can see that we've got our main projects and then the tasks underneath. Now that we've done that, we've also then got a plus sign here in order to include different attributes around those particular tasks. So things like status would be useful for that particular task, so we can include that. We can look at start date and end date. So let's get our start date on here, our end date on here, and probably duration might be quite good to have on here. We might, because we're looking at this being like a dashboard, we might want to have a look at the type of resource, so the resource required, and also the assigned resource. So there we go, we're really starting now to see we've got a project here that hasn't got any tasks, so that's something to bear in mind. We can also collapse and expand all of these. So we've got the view here that we sort of want to get. Now we need to include filtering on here. We can configure the filtering for these additional tabs. So we'd want a filter. So if we select a filter on here, we can do where, and we can look at where there's tasks that have, or a project where the total number of unallocated tasks is greater than 0, for instance. So that's something we might need to have a look or go back to our bases on, because we'll need to be able to pull that at project level. And then we've got late tasks. So we can have a count at project level for both the number of late tasks and also the number of unallocated tasks. We might also, I think what would look really good here is an idea of the sort of start date and end date for a project. Now, though we're not storing that at project level, we can calculate that based on the tasks that we've got against that project. So for this MapForce project for Tesco, it could be that, well, it should be that start date on here should be the 1st of March and the end date would be the 24th, because we get the minimum start date and the maximum end date. So we should be able to glean that kind of information. And then we can also look at having some kind of a percentage complete. So in order to do that, we need to be able to get how many tasks have been completed, how many tasks have we got remaining, and then we can work a percentage out based on that. So we need to go back to our basis now just to enhance that a little bit, and that will enable us to better configure this interface in order to give the information that we want to the user. So let's jump to our basis, and we can see on the data side what we need. So let's jump over to our project table, and then we can start building this up with some additional information. So firstly, we want to add a new field here, which is going to be called start date. This is then going to be a roll-up field. We've already got a link to task at the moment, so we can say that that's based on task, and what we want to be able to do is the field we want to roll up is our start date. And what we will do on this is we will do a minimum. So in order to do a minimum, we need to select min. Should we do that? And then we can create that field. And then we can do the same for the end date, where we're going to also do a roll up based on our task table and based on the field which is end date. But in this case, instead of min, we're going to do max. And there we go. So we're able to get our start and end date for that. Then what will be useful is a duration, because we've now got start and end dates at project level because we're calculating it. We can then look to do a calculation based on the duration in order to, start date and end date in order to get the duration. So let's go on to, where are we, formula. And within our formula, we can then, again, similar to what we did in our previous one, we can do a date diff. And then we can supply our end date. There we go. Because we're now calculating that. We can then do our start date. And that's going to work. However, as we noted in our previous session, when we covered bases, if we do that, we'll get a non-applicable if we've got any tasks that don't have a date. So if this ends up being null, so what we want to do is we want to use an if statement, and we want to go if, and we'll use the and, because we're checking to see if end date and start date are populated, and if they are, we then want to be able to do our date diff. So I'm just going to cut that and throw that in here. Otherwise, we want it to be 0. So we can create that now. And I've calculated something incorrectly here. Oh, of course I have. I've got to supply days because that's what we want it converted into. Otherwise it's making an assumption there. Okay, there we go. So 24 minus 1, 23. There we go. And difference between 17 and 24 is 7. Perfect. And here we've got a 0 because we've got no tasks here. So there we go. So that works well for that. So we've now got a start date, end date, and duration. We then really need some kind of numeric fields here because we want to work out the total tasks, task complete, task not allocated, and late tasks. We need those metrics so we can start pulling those into our interface. So let's start doing that now. So we want to have some sort of percentage that represents the task complete. In order to do that, we need to know what the total tasks we have. So we're going to call this one total tasks. This is going to be a field that's going to be a count. And we are going to count the number of tasks. So if I then hit create, we've got 2, 1, and 0. Perfect. We then want to add task complete. So in order to do that, that's also going to be a count. We're going to count based on tasks, and we do want to add a condition in on here. We want a condition where status is equal to complete. And then we can create that. So we've got total tasks, task complete, and then we can work out our percentage. So for our percentage, we want our percentage complete is going to be based on a formula. So let's put this just so we've got that percentage in here. There we go. And we want to create a formula. So again, just to make sure we're escaping all scenarios where we might have zeros and we start getting some weird ones around dividing 0, we want to make sure that we've got both a total tasks value and also a tasks complete. So if both of those are populated, we're then quite happy to do tasks complete divided by total tasks. Otherwise, we're going to return 0. So there we go. Create field. Perfect. So what we can do is I'm going to jump over to tasks and I'm going to complete one of these tasks just so that we've got, let's complete this one. Then let's jump back to project and our percentage is complete. Let's look at formatting. It's going to be a percentage, display, it's progress. We're going to have a progress bar and then we hit save. There we go. So that gives us our progress bar based on the calculation here. Now, next we want to look at the tasks not allocated and the late tasks. So what we want to do again, we're going to go tasks not allocated. This is then going to be another count. We're looking again at our tasks and we want to filter. So we want to have where assigned resource is empty. So we've got that. So if I jump back to tasks, we can then look at removing assigned resource. So we take Jane Doe off that one, go back to project, and there we go. So under our MapForce project, which is the project this one's under, we then have one that is not allocated. Then we can look at late tasks. So here, late tasks is going to be another count. Based on our task. And this is going to need two where clauses. We want where end date is before. We want it before today. And status is not complete. Because again, we're not worried about if the end date's passed, if the current status is complete. So there we go, we can look at late tasks. So let's go back again. We can change one of these. So let's say the start date for this one is, let's roll it back to like February or something here. And here, there we go. So now that should in theory be a late task because it's not signed, it's not even started. Go back and we should have, move across here. There we go, we've got one late task here. So that works in order to start putting some metrics on our projects table so that we can start looking at using this now for our interface. So what we want to do now is look at how we can reflect this to use the details we've now added to our projects base. So firstly, I'm going to start looking at the filters here. So we've got projects with unallocated tasks. So when we select this now, we've got a condition we can add in. So here we're going to be looking at where unallocated task or task not allocated is greater than 0. There we go. And then we can do the similar solution for task not complete. Or late tasks, sorry. So let's have a look. Late tasks, there we go, is greater than 0. And then we're able to get the projects that have got unallocated tasks. And we can see here, this isn't assigned. And then those that are late, we can actually see, I mean, it's the same task, but it's late there. So that sorts out the tab side of things. What we then want to do is start looking at our projects. So really the task level looks okay, but we want to look at the project level. So in order to do that, we need to look at what fields we've got visible. So I'm going to drop down here. We're going to look at level 2, which is our projects. And we're going to start having a review of what we want to see. Now here we've got the name from owner and the email address from the owner. We're not worried about that. We can hide those off. So we can hide those. What we are interested in are things like the start date, which we know we've now got because it's the min start date of a task, end date, the max end date of a task, and then we can look at bringing in how complete it is. So very quickly here, we've got something that looks a lot better than what we had previously. What we also want to be able to do here is we want to be able to add new projects from this as well. So in order to do that, add records in line. There we go. So we're selecting the main. So we've got in here where we can start adding things at this level. At the whole top level here, we can then look at adding here. So when we select add a project now and select this, if I go into preview, from here we can then hit add project. And here we've got the option to add the name, notes, document, and obviously the owner for the project. Now this is actually completed. We can then look at publishing. So if I now hit publish, we can then publish this, and this would then be available if we were to share this with other business users. Edit pages. So there we have our kind of list level interface. What we then want to have a look at is adding an additional interface around our insights. So here we might want to create something again that's going to be more around sort of reporting and that side, but here we would look to then use a dashboard where we can then start adding metrics, some lists, some other graphs, etc., and things like that. Just something that will give us some more high level views of what is potentially wrong, anything we need to have a look at, etc. So let's look at how we would do that in a project like this. So we then hit next. For this, we can then look at having it based on a project. Right, so straight away, we've got this dashboard, we've got the insights here, and we might, for instance, want to recall this or rename it project dashboard. And we can look at what we want to add to this. So if we're going to put a dashboard together, we need to think of the kind of elements that would be useful at a high level for audiences such as management. If we're going to do that, we can look at how we can use counts. So here we can use different counts. We can do some summaries. We can do some averages. So something that might be quite useful here would be something like project duration. And then the description here, or the smaller subtitle, would be average length of a project in days, maybe. And then we can look at allowing this to calculate that. So we'll be looking at doing some kind of a summary, and the field we'll be looking at would be duration. And then we'd be looking to do an average. And here we can also look at changing the color of the text there. So we can make this a darker blue, for instance. And there we go. So quite quickly we've managed to add a count onto that. Now we might want to add some additional counts on here as well, because we might want to be looking at things like maybe where we've got some projects at risk. So we can start slotting these. And again, how I've managed to do that, as you add, it will add a new row in. But obviously, because this is just accounts, it's taking up quite a small amount of space on the screen. We can look at dragging that down so that we can place these together. So we're going to have project duration, and we then here might have, let's say, projects at risk. So what is a project at risk? Well, an at-risk project will be any project that's got late tasks or potentially unallocated resource. Okay, so this is going to be based on our project still, and we're going to add a filter. So we're going to add a condition here, and we need to check where we've got any late tasks. So to do that, we can do late tasks is greater than 0. And we can add another condition, or if we've got any that haven't been allocated. So task not allocated, again, greater than 0. So we can use that. And then on here, this is just going to be a count. And again, because this is generally going to be a negative value, in that sense that it's not good if it's if we've got anything there that is of a positive number. But we can also change this as well. So we can look at conditions on here. So we can say where the number is greater than 0. We can apply different conditioning. So we're able to do that and change the colors on here. So we're gonna make that red. So there we go. Okay, so we've got these sort of numeric ones there. We might want to look at what we can do from a bar graph perspective as well. So we can look at plotting the delivery dates for certain projects here, and we can see how many projects are going to be delivered. We've also got line graphs here as well. So we've got various different options, pie charts, and we can start looking at how we're going to use these. So we could potentially have a bar graph, and we can have that plotting the number of projects potentially based on their delivery date. So we can have a look at potentially doing that. So we've got the x-axis and the y-axis. So the x-axis is the start date. We might actually want to be looking more at the end date. We can also show the number of records here, and we can click in to see the actual projects. Yeah, that's fine there. So there we go. So we can click in to get the underlying projects that are due on those dates. So we've got bar graphs there as well. So we've got that just as a high level on the project side. We may actually also want to add something in here, so we can actually add some additional details in here if we so wish. We can also look at adding a new group. So here we can actually look at adding tasks on here as well. And we can look at adding lists on this. So what we might want to do, can we get a, let's do it on here. Yep, we can do a list. Bring that up on here maybe, and we can have a list of the projects, and we can start changing a lot of this because we want that on here. We find, yep, we no, we want the owner. Hide that, hide this, and then to make this really clear, we can have the end date on here. So we've got the project area here, which is talking about our projects and some bar graphs, etc. on here. And then we can look at, for instance, tasks. Now here we can look at adding a number. And we can be looking at something like in progress. So we might want to know how many tasks we've got in progress. So we can do a count on here. We can filter it, add a condition, look at our status, and we can say where it is equal to in progress. And then on here again, we can start looking at our color coding if we want to. So we can do that. We can put conditional on if we want to do that as well. We can then also look to add another number. And here we might look at complete. And again, this is going to be a simple count where we're filtering by the status again. And you can see these are really, really simple and straightforward to put together. Now you can obviously make these more complex. We can change the color. We can also change the background if you want to as well. But I think that's going to be fairly straightforward on that. Right, then I want to drag that here. So we've got complete, in progress, and we might as well have not started as well. So we go not started. And again, fairly straightforward here. We can do this based on the status, not started. And then we can do, we've got the count. And this is obviously going to be red. Perfect. So on here as well, that I've missed out. So on the color coding, you can also change the background. So we're going to do that on these just to tie them in a little bit nicely. There we go. So we've got in progress, complete, not started. And then we might want to have a look at adding a list on here. So we can look at adding a list, and we can look at adding some tasks and putting some filtering on here. So we can look at having the basic level of tasks on here. We can look at removing some of the non-required fields. So we've got the role required, the resource. That looks okay. Let's look at, that's the first level, filter by. So we might want to group by project. There we go. So we can add all of this kind of grouping in order to better service this and give a much better user interface on here. So we can see now that we've got two projects. These are the assigned roles and resources for this. And again, because we're looking at tasks and it's at that high level, it may be that we want to add the end dates on here as well. And again, that's really something that's quite straightforward to do. We might not at this point be bothered about the role required, so we can hide this. We may actually be interested more on the status. just so that that's more visible here. So we can add the status in. So all of this is quite useful for us to see here in order to get a good look on the tasks. Now we can even then go and add another group, person, and we can look at adding a list here. And we might want to add a filter on here where we go tasks has none of, or is empty. Let's try is empty, and project is empty as well. So we've got someone that isn't associated to a task or isn't managing a project. So on here we can look at adding a description to describe. So unassigned, so we can do unassigned resources or free resources depending on terminology there. So there we go. So now we've got 3 pieces to this dashboard that very easily allows us to have a look from a project perspective, what ones are at risk, whether our average duration is exceeding what we want, our thresholds, projects where they are at a high level, the tasks in progress, complete and not started, and also if we've got any members of staff there that aren't allocated to anything, then we can look at actually contacting Bob the Builder in this case, or seeing what we can allocate them to. So that's our dashboard. We can then go in here and, like we did with our previous one, we can look at publishing that. And then once that's published, we're able to share that when we need to. So now our project dashboard has been published. Let's look at adding an interface for our team. So we can go team and hit next. We're going to actually create a Kanban board. So this will be used by all team members in order to progress their tasks. So we can hit next on this. This is going to be based on tasks, and the stacking field is not going to be whether they're a developer or a project manager. That doesn't really make sense in this case. It's going to be on status. So we're going to have uncategorized, not started, in progress, and complete. So let's finish on that now. So here we've got this. We're then going to rename this. I'm going to call this Kanban board. Go through on here and see what we've got. So what fields we've got visible. We've got the name of the task. So we probably want the duration. So we can see on here the name of the task, how long it's going to take. I would say we probably want to have the start date and the end date on here. So it's very visible as to when it needs to be done. We then want to see the assigned resource and probably the role required as well. I think that will be pretty much, from a task perspective, everything we'll need to know. And then a team member can actually come in on this, and they will be able to, Twin Designer, will be able to drag from, for instance, not started, and move this over as they're progressing through on this. So we can see we've got no resource assigned to this, so that will need to be assigned, and then this one does. So I'm assigned to this. I'll be able to then move it to in progress, and then as that goes through, I can then move it to complete, as opposed to actually going into the record and updating it. However, I think for the Kanban board, it will be really useful to be able to click in and go in on a particular record, and to go in on here, and then you can potentially go in and make changes potentially if we allow it. So go on here, details will be only editable. All users and fields will be editable. Yep. So there we go. So then they can go on here and start actually editing that as and when they need to. So that then means that we've got a really nice Kanban board. And before I actually publish it, we can click the preview toggle here and see how this potentially will work. So this isn't actually allowing me to drag it over. So I think I need to edit this in order to allow that functionality. So inline edits, there we go. So now if I go preview, we're able to then actually drag this into various stages as well. And it works as we would expect a Kanban board to work. So now that's done, we can then look at potentially publishing this. Have we got any color options? Oh no, we're on the free bit, so we won't for this for the moment. So then I can hit publish, and now basically that's ready. So we've now got our projects dashboard where we can quite easily see our unallocated tasks and late tasks. We've then got our insights, which is our project dashboard where we get a high level overview of what's going on. And then we've got our team one where we've got our Kanban board. And again, with this, we can create sub ones, filters, etc. to enable our team members to go through and filter themselves. Everything has generally got a filter on here, so we're able to do that anyway, but it'd be quite nice to have something that's quite quick and easy to navigate that way. So that covers our interfaces for our integration project management solution. We'll look at the automation side in the next session. That completes our session on interfaces. If you want to learn how to implement automations in this solution, then feel free to subscribe to be notified. Thank you.